So, thank you, Arjen van der Wijk from Cibus Nexum, for coming on this episode of Future of Foods interviews. Cibus Nexum is an independent European food industry specialist that helps brands, startups, and retailers uh, and producers bring food products from concept to market. So it'll be interesting to find out exactly how you do that. So maybe Arjen, you can introduce yourself and give us a little background into Cibus Nexum and specifically what are the solutions that Cibus Nexum are offering startups and founders?
Great. Well, first of all, thanks, Alex, for joining this episode of Future Foods. I'm really delighted to do that, and hope to share some of the insights of both our experience, the company personally, as well as stories, hopefully. About myself, having a mechanical engineering background. I'm 51 years old right now, and living in the Netherlands, being a Dutchman. And since I became a self-employed professional, I turned into the food industry and actually never left because it's such an interesting and vibrant environment. Always something to do, mostly in the area of procurement and supply chain. And later on, also got into the topic of outsourcing of production, external manufacturing. There's so many different names and words for that, but basically, it's the collaboration with external parties when it comes to producing food products. So, well, exactly 5 years ago, we have launched our company, Cibus Nexum, or Cibus Nexum in Latin, which is the translation is food and connection. Basically, that boils down to connecting clients, which can be corporates, startups, food tech scale-ups, with the right manufacturing partners. Those partners can be just straightforward co-packers or co-manufacturers or a combination. We'll come back to that later. That's the setup of your supply chain. So we help them in their journey of launching innovations, having ideas, having all kinds of future plans. And our focus is primarily just on the manufacturing side of things. So there's so many companies out there which are offering help on legal stuff, on team building, on the finance, on the funding, and so on. We thought there was a need, and it turns out to be actually also a need of supporting companies in this area. And well, it's a really nice thing to do. We had our record year turnover last year, just closing the books now. Looks very promising also in next steps. But yeah, that's a little bit a grasp of what we're doing so far. Actually,
Hey,
proud of that. And I'm one of the owners and founders together with Pascal Russiers.
okay. How long's the company been going for?
Well, the idea was started during Corona time 5 years ago. Now, the official establishment was the 6th of April. So we have a few months to go. Then it's officially 5 years. Yeah. So we're
Okay.
a startup ourselves, actually.
Yeah. So you have all the connections and the idea is that you bring people together to put people in contact with people that they and so you'd go into their business and you'd help them work out who they need and then you'd help them find those people. Is it that
Yeah.
in a
That
nutshell?
that's in a nutshell, let's say the principle of the matchmaking, connecting the right companies. We go a little bit beyond that. Initially, the idea from our company was around that model of matchmaking. So having this database of all these manufacturers in place. Back then, it turned out, okay, that's quite a massive job to do. Also, the maintenance part of things. So it would shifted a bit more towards executing projects, actually helping clients in that area. Um, but yeah, matchmaking is part of it. Of course, there's also a big part of design and advice. Okay, someone has an idea, and typically with startups and scale-ups in future food environments, there is a magnificent technical idea, but lacking, for instance, knowledge on how to scale up on the company, how to scale up the manufacturing thing. And that's specifically the area where we would like to add our value. So executing projects, doing advice, but matchmaking, obviously, having the network and the entrance with those companies, knowing where to find them, yeah, that makes a big difference. Actually, we sell time, right? Someone can do it themselves, but it could take a year or two to build the network that we have already in place. the information we have. So that's a little bit the leverage. The leverage is time here. Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, on your website, you describe yourself as Swiss Army knife for innovative food production management.
correct.
So I'm assuming that alludes to, you have a tool for every purpose. You're an all-purpose. Uh,
Yeah, kind of. I personally, my background is also quite versatile in terms of procurement and supply chain and mechanical engineering, food industry, different industries. But also, there are two things here, right? When it comes to this metaphor of Swiss Army knife, is first there are typical different clients, like say startups and corporate companies and food tech scale-ups, all having different needs. So the angles of what they might need as a service or advice can be from benchmarking current production setup, launching a new innovation, or just simply making a make or buy assessment, like we did for Friesland Campina in the launch of their first plant-based products in their history, is supporting with a make or buy assessment and also reaching out to the market. What are the options there and how feasible is it to outsource the production and then compare that to internal production logics? So yeah, that's
okay.
does it answer your question?
It does. It does.
Great.
And you talk about connecting brand owners, retailers, startups, and producers via your food flow method. So what's the food flow method?
Correct. Yeah, this is a structured method based on the principles of the stage gate model. I think a lot of people know the stage gate model, where innovations and product development are processed through a sequence of activities, but also go and go no moments, right? To review the current status and to make a decision how to proceed. That's exactly what we build as well with our design, find, onboard, and launch. So with these steps, we're able to um, adapt also to current situations or changing situations, but in any case, move step to the next stage where we have the flexibility to adjust, but also not needing to sell client a complete end-to-end product. When you discover during, for instance, trials with a co-manufacturer, the quality is okay, the samples are good, but yeah, pricing goes, let's say, sideways, right? Then you have to break out, or we have experienced it sometimes, no, not often, but sometimes that the technical solution or actually the industrial scaling fails at that point for whatever reason. And then you want to have the opportunity to not be stuck to a fixed contract or a fixed approach, but adjust the course or sometimes also quit the project, right? That's the reason why we have made this step-by-step model. Um, so yeah, and in that model, we have integrated all the experience we have from the past. So it's also a fully an enhanced Gantt project planning with all the necessary steps, takeover points, and all the documents we might need in the process, supporting this four-step model. So this is the way we guide the project and our client from the basic concept until the final launch of the product on the innovation. Yeah.
Okay. So I suppose you are, a startup would usually, they might not have the product manager that they need or the project management that they need, and so you fulfill that role, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. In some cases, we as experts are simply added to the team, like an extension on operations or supply chain, with the specific job to perform a role as an add-on. But when it comes to executing the projects, when we are applying the food flow method, then indeed project management is also part of the scope. So we have the advisory part, we have the finding part or guiding the trials, but overall, indeed, we unburden the client also with this project management, that this entire, let's say, trajectory is being managed well with weekly meetings, with quick interference and setup. So yes, correct. That's in part of the job, usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're able to save startups quite a lot of money. in that regard because you kind of do the role of perhaps a few full-time staff that they would normally need.
Yeah, that's correct. And we had engaged with a few startups recently where they said, okay, in this case, we need a plant-based solution for that. In the next one, we need a hybrid solution for that. I can hire 5 people, which have 5 different levels of expertise and network connections. But they said, okay, it makes total sense to add you or Cibus Nexum to their team on a temporary and a flexible basis, where then we, on a specific topic, we jump in and make sure that we tackle that topic. And then the project comes and goes, and it's much a more flexible way. And it also saves time, right? You don't have to hire someone is on the job. It's taking a year to build a network, and then you're off to go for approaching the potential partners. That's something that we have in the pocket already and deploy from the first start of any project. Correct.
Okay, okay. Um, so I suppose you're kind of balancing, you're using your experience to advise companies on how to move fast, how to produce, how to kind of get their factories up to a production scale that is that's useful. I mean, so how do you balance that move fast product uh, up upscaling with the realities that factories need stability to run efficiently?
Yeah, and this is always a catch-22 situation in bringing innovations to market. With startup and scale-up situation, volumes in the beginning are always lower than just winning a tender and you have 1,000 products a month to produce. It starts with 1,000 kilogram for half a year, for instance, right? So the challenge is, first of all, to find a partner or a pilot facility or whatever scenario which is able to start with a relatively low volume, but having, let's say, the guarantee that this small production level, whether it's in pilot scale facility or industrial size, is also suitable for scaling up. So you're covered when it comes to the step of the laboratory and the factory, the small factory pilot plant, to a bigger industrial size environment. Secondly, there can be a challenge when it comes to, yeah, that's more in the corporate scene where innovations need to be launched quick, and you might consider a rapid prototyping model, or we have our fast track innovation approach where we have really quick iterations with producers or pilot facilities, where we can quickly interact with the client and do rapid prototyping, and meanwhile use small batch samples for consumer testing, A/B testing, and so on. So there are different ways of tackling the gap between starting with nothing and get this ball rolling, right? Um, yeah, it's always the challenge in startup lands, specifically when you have low volumes to start with, how to ramp up that in a flexible and agile way.
Yeah, and I
We call that
suppose,
agile upscaling.
yeah, I suppose in the world of alternative proteins, and I don't know whether you're working in cultivated meat at all, probably not at this stage, but that industry is, their big dilemma is how to scale up quickly to bring some cost to bring some price parity down
Yeah,
to a
correct.
level that makes them more
Yeah,
commercially, you know,
yeah.
viable.
And the
Yeah.
challenge there is also the balance in the beginning, right? Do we want to invest in our own facility or our first of a kind facility where we capture our, let's say, IP, and we have our knowledge captured in our own environment? And then, for instance, involve third parties for the less complex downstream processing, packaging, distribution, and whatever. We see in some cases, some examples in Europe now that companies are moving away. They have established this pilot facility, but it actually blocks them in further scaling because also this facility has its limits. And you can put another facility in place, but in a lot of cases, investors aren't so keen on putting money in stainless steel and equipment and in bricks rather than in a flexible business model, which has a proven way of scaling, right? A co-manufacturer, for instance, can add another shift to the production line, or maybe free some room on other facility instead of just being stuck to a certain level of your own equipment capacity. So this asset light approach, in a lot of cases, is more appropriate to support this agile upscaling of innovations, especially when there is a configuration or process designed with specific mechanical steps or processing requirements, which are on itself not unique, but maybe the combination of these steps, the sequence of these steps, can make it difficult to put it into one factory or to have one co-manufacturer
Mm.
close by. So that can be, well, there's so many different ways and scenarios to tackle your production
Yeah,
challenge.
it's interesting. You said that a pilot plant can often be a blockage. I spoke to Jim Mellon not long ago, and he's I don't know if you know, he's the founder of Agronomics. It's invested lots of money in lots of
Mhm.
proteins and kind of cultivated meat companies. And he said a similar thing. He said that he doesn't really believe in pilot. Uh,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
pilot
Well, there
plants.
it's nice that you mentioned that, because recently there was also a nice post on LinkedIn, where there was someone actually promoting the fact that when you scale, you need to have your own facility, right? I think it can be, but only in the case if you have, let's say, captured a certain very specific technology inside a machine or inside some piece of equipment. But in the case you need, let's say, spray drying or encapsulation or fermentation in reactors, those pieces of equipment and processing, that's out there. Whether you are, let's say, close by to a brewery, which has the facility, of course, or you have a old dairy factory and they're transforming into a dedicated plant-based drinks manufacturing. But then you have the homogenizers, you have the pumps, you have the tanks, and you have the equipment already in place. So in a lot of cases, it doesn't justify massive capex to start off the business. Um, but it's, yeah, there are two ways of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose there's more flexibility if you're kind of renting facilities rather than building your own, right?
Yeah, renting a facility could be one, and then put in your own equipment, or just having a contract with a co-manufacturer. And some people say, yeah, well, the co-manufacturing, because they have overhead themselves, it should be more expensive. But I think in a lot of cases, it's being underestimated that co-manufacturers have a lot of buying power on their end with regard to the packaging material, with regard to the raw material. So they may have huge contracts with a great discount. Just a simple example of how they can leverage their power into your cost breakdown. Um, and the other thing is, well, they have the knowledge. They have sometimes also, well, in most cases, they have the certification to produce products for food service, for retail and things. And that's, if you have your own factory, you have to set it up yourself. Co-mans do have that. They can produce halal, they can do kosher, they can do organic, or a combination of that. So there's quite an advantage of engaging first with. In some cases, it also happens that after 2 or 3 years, volumes are going through the roof, right? You're having such a massive growth explosion that at that moment in time, it still might be very useful to do a reverse make or buy assessment and conclude, yes, now it's time to build our own factory. Now it makes total sense to have that and focus on, for instance, the IP concentration in the semi-finished goods. That's just as an example. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. A couple of names came to mind when you were talking then. Kind of Meatable might be one of them, and Believer Meats maybe another one that kind of
Yeah.
spent an awful lot of money up front on their facilities.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah, that's interesting business cases. Yeah, and then, well, in some cases they, for different reasons, they collapse those situations. And you also mentioned the cultivated meat. I personally, but what was my personal view and opinion? Well, about a year ago, 2 years ago, that in the cultivated area, especially in the cultivated meat area, I really had strong doubts of the possibility of upscaling, right? Because it's such a sensitive process and it's such a difficult process to contain and to, let's say, to manage. 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 And to, let's say, to man So I had my doubts if it really was technically scalable, let alone financially uh, feasible. But yeah, we see some movements now there that it's actually happening. So I'm really, maybe I have to adjust my opinion, but that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
We're here to learn.
I
Yeah.
don't think any of us really know. I mean, I've spoken to many people who should know, who don't necessarily know. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's still a little bit vague, but yes, there are movements in certain areas like sort of cultivated fats and which I think are probably going to be the first wave of successful commercialization.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah.
Yeah. So, when do you think a service should be outsourced, and when should it be kept in-house? How do you advise startups on that?
Yeah, that this question might already imply that you only have two options, right? To start with, outsource or do it yourself. There is a big a difference between that, but of course also a different layers because outsourcing can be just the packaging of a product, or outsourcing can also be producing the downstream processing like treatment, heating, and whatsoever, but also can be the core processing like the fermentation or encapsulation process, whatever. So there is a difference between total outsourcing or own factory or partially outsourcing. And then, like, for instance, having a joint venture with a manufacturer can also be an outsourcing model where you capture the technology together with a company into a joint venture structure. And still you have a co-manufacturer, but the two of you are connected in this commercial and legal model of capturing that. So there is not a single answer. And we always um, in our design stage, this is typically a topic, besides, for instance, designing the end supply chain, this is always a topic that is so important to investigate. And for instance, splitting your production between one co-manufacturer or your own factory on semi-finished good and downstream processing can be because of supply chain reasons, right? It's simply too expensive to have something produced in Poland and ship it back to France, so we have to split it. Just an example. Or it can be IP related, right? You have to capture your technology and your know-how into the semi-finished product and keep it close to yourself. There's also a cost component, for instance, involved. So there are different reasons to consider and different topics when considering an outsourcing scenario. Yeah.
Okay,
But
yeah,
in general, I would say, coming back to your question, if you have a very specific technology captured in a process or a machine, that would imply investing in your own equipment. But still, then what you mentioned, you can rent a facility which is not your own and put in your equipment in there, and having a food safe environment to produce. Still a blended model. Yeah.
yeah. It sounds like you're providing a very useful service. I mean, if from my experience, a lot of the CEOs of alternative meat companies and cultivated and sort of precision fermentation are perhaps of scientists
Yeah.
who have a PhD, but they don't necessarily have any kind of business
Correct.
training, and they probably don't have any kind of experience in manufacturing.
Yeah.
So, have you found that?
Yes. Yes, definitely. Yeah, we see, well, we have some exceptions there, of course, but in a lot of cases, these founders and, well, they have a PhD, there's so much knowledge and captured in one topic, one specific innovation, and then building a team, getting funding, but also making sure that you know how to upscale. And we have experienced in recent projects that it's not just the founding team, let's say the CEO, CTO, and but also backwards to the investors, um, also now engaged in some of the projects that we are executing, really interested in learning as early as possible in the journey what are the potential pitfalls and, well, measures to prevent them, of course, later on in scaling production, in doing trials, in knowing, for instance, okay, what difference does it make to have a process in the kitchen? Well, you stir in a pot on the stove, it's all going fine, you can use all day. but you don't have all the time in a facility in a factory, right? You have to be cautious of time of idle time in the factory. Just a simple example of the aspect of waste in an innovation in a process. In the case you are, let's say, producing on a pilot scale or in your kitchen, nothing goes to waste. You can use everything that you're preparing, but transferring that to a complex system in a factory with pumps, with filters, with tanks, with and all kinds of material sticking behind in those equipment needs to be purged and cleaned after every production run. The lower the quantity of such a batch, the higher the waste percentage of such a batch. It can easily be 20 to 25% of waste. And that's not something that people calculate in the beginning when they are in the kitchen and the lab still working on their concept at TRL level 2, 3, maybe 4. But once you are going to upscale to TRL 7, 6, 7, and you find out that those big machines, first of all, they need a very big minimum production quantity. Otherwise, the mixer in the tank doesn't work at all, besides the waste effect. But those typical metrics, economics in how to, let's say, enlarge and industrialize such a process, you should know that upfront.
Mm.
Maybe already in the kitchen or before the kitchen, that when you have an idea and it sounds magnificent, well, it's our challenge to hold the mirror and also assess that concept in terms of feasibility and viability and sustainability as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So I suppose in processes like that, incredibly complex, sort of precision processes like precision
Right.
fermentation, there's an awful lot that can go wrong.
Yeah.
And when you begin, you're not necessarily considering the things that can go wrong. And so, what have you found in your experience are the things, the mistakes people make, or the things that go wrong more often that perhaps kind of block upscaling and growth?
Yeah, one thing is, well, quite a simple but really obvious example is the volume. I'm already mentioned that in startup landscape, the starting volume can be quite low. There is a balance between the volume, the minimum production quantity at a factory, and the shelf life of a product. So the longer the shelf life, you have more flexibility in increasing production runs, right? If you have a shelf life of 1 year, you can perhaps do a production run every 3 months. But if it's 4 weeks, like you have a consumer product of 4 weeks shelf life, and the retailer wants to have 3 weeks of shelf life out of that, then your own shelf life bandwidth is 1 week. That means you have to produce every 1 or 2 days. Then the batch quantity of every production run is a few kilogram or something like that instead of 3,000 or 10,000. So this is the delicate balance between the shelf life and production quantity. And in the case you're adding a lot more of different SKUs, different kinds of packaging sizes, different flavors, for instance. I'm not talking about food tech. I'm really talking here about consumer product because that speaks, right? People understand what that means. This problem is less important in food tech environment because you're ending up with a B2B ingredient. But when you have different consumer products, like for instance, 4 different flavors with relatively low volume, and it is a fresh product, then it's so complex to have those 4 products being produced at a bigger scale factory. And this is just simply to highlight the balance and the complexity of scaling up, besides the waste topic we just spoke about. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a very fine balance and
Yeah.
on really fine margins as well, I suppose. I mean, you mentioned sustainability earlier.
Yeah.
In your experience, what's sustainability promises that people make can tend to collapse during scale up?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because in a lot of cases, when it's about alternative protein, where your purpose is to replace meat and conventional dairy and cheese, then almost automatically you're reducing carbon footprint, right? Because there's no meat in there. But in some cases, the processes of achieving the end result are so time and energy consuming that, well, it doesn't totally ruin the business case, but that is something really important to consider. For instance, in bioreactors or whatever, fermentation processes, they can take quite long. some cases also use quite some energy. Um, and then your sustainability goals, yeah, they look fantastic, but in real life, it's totally different, and you have to let's say certain processing steps in a factory require a lot of pressure, a lot of heat, and a lot of processing, for instance, steam and whatsoever. So it's difficult to make that calculation when you're doing that in the kitchen, but we have to consider that as well as early as possible in the journey. What is finally the footprint of my own process, right? And also, for instance, um, there are situations where a very specific ingredient or raw material input is required for a process, and the balance or the tolerance in the quality parameters is very strict. And this really specific ingredient has to come from the jungle in the Philippines, right? And there, if there is a harvest failure or a crop failure, do you have an alternative? Can you also switch from one protein source to another protein source to make your process more versatile and resilient? And besides the sustainability topic, that's also something we look at. How sensitive is the source in your process? And so, yeah.
So this is something you can advise companies on how to get alternative ingredients, maybe how to source their products, as well as the manufacturing side of things.
Yeah, we focus primarily, of course, on the manufacturing side of things. And it's their responsibility ultimately to, well, I think to make their process more resilient and versatile by not focusing on very premium sources of ingredients or very specific requirements towards manufacturing. This is also something that we take into account during the find stage of our process, where we are engaging with manufacturers. First, after we have done this massive design stage, sometimes also even a workshop together with the client, then we're all set and we are preparing for the find phase with a anonymous, let's say, summary of the project. But we don't capture too much details in that request for information towards manufacturers because we want to open doors. We don't want to close doors. We also know by experience that having a big book of requirements like those supermarket giants are doing with these big tender files, we don't want to do that. We want to have this discussion with the co-manufacturer and have their experience, their opinion, and maybe also, for instance, on the ingredient sourcing, their buying power, or perhaps available network to say, okay, wow, this might also be an interesting solution. Bring it back to the client and assess that. So that's our job. We can't force our client to change the recipe or their ideas, but along the way, it might turn out there are some alternatives, and that's, I think, really important to keep in mind in engaging with production partners exploring this.
And you said that the business is doing very well. So I mean, is that an indication that the industry itself is growing, is doing well, or is this a service that hasn't necessarily been available before? So what's your view of the industry as a whole, kind of bearing in mind your role in it?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's a quite a broad question, but to bring it down to just our existence, of course, we had to put a lot of effort in it to prove our existence and to start. We were lucky to have the launching customer of Danone. We first pitched our idea and they said, okay, wow, let's come back when you're ready. And we done that, and we have the first project with Danone, which was amazing to do. And then the ball started to roll, and we also discovered along the way that these, and it started with Formo in Berlin, that these scale-ups with the, well, not building an innovation, they're building a company along the way, requires this kind of expertise. And they are in need of someone knowing the dynamics and the challenges of outsourcing production, collaborating with co-mans, and also have the network, right? So it's not about bringing the massive experience that we have already. We are selling completely new services, right? We have to introduce that to the market. we're in a good position now that we are recognized. People know us. We are being connected and let's say also, how do you say, connected with other people and recommended with clients. So it's also a little bit of mouth to mouth marketing. But yeah, it's finding its way. We're operating in a niche in the food industry because typically the way we execute it, it's not yet there in Europe. Of course, there are companies supporting clients in specific development of recipes or products. And along the way, they also have a network of some producers where they can make connections, and that's good. There are a few of them. So the service in general is quite unique in Europe. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, so you said that you started up during COVID. Now, clearly there was a
Right.
lot more money going into this industry around that time in kind of 2020.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
gone down quite significantly
Yeah.
over the last couple of years. Have you, has that impacted you at all?
Us personally, as a company, not, because still there are quite a few examples of companies who get well funded, who are obtaining the right funds. It has been a couple of years quite well declining and difficult. It's becoming a little bit more difficult to obtain funding. Um, but there's also another trend we're seeing is that these bigger corporate groups little bit lacking behind in their innovations also during COVID time, where you see that in other areas, like for instance, these startups and scale-ups, the innovation is still continuing and the ideas are still popping up. Of course, some companies quit and consolidate are being taken over, but there's still always movement and changes. There's still new innovations coming up. So it hasn't affected us. I think, on the contrary, we had more projects than the year before, and also more in the area of food tech. So not just B2B, B2C consumer products, but more and more also in the B2B area of food tech ingredients. So no, yeah, maybe it's let's say uh, moving the other way around in our area when it comes to the economical waves.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you say that is, and so is Danone your main client, or it's a substantial client of yours, but they're clearly not a startup.
Yeah.
So, and so what is it that you provide for them that they don't have in-house?
Yeah, it's a good one. No, for corporate companies, we have different, let's say, unique selling points. Let's say we can be, one of them is the innovation of new concepts. And I'm not talking about then the new product development, which are already in the NPD funnel. So those are ideas already brought to the market. But those are more the concepts which they are projecting into a future. They see some trends, they see ideas, and they say, okay, I want to have this fantastic meal. It has to have a long shelf life, a fantastic packaging, but separated compartments. It's for a very specific target group. Please support us in first assess the concept. Is this feasible from technical point of view? Okay, let's do that. And secondly, reach out to the market anonymously to see and to validate if those concepts can actually be produced. So we're talking here about future core, future, well, innovations, which ultimately may end up into an NPD funnel. That's one topic. Secondly, it can also be just a resource challenge where, for instance, Friesland Campina has hired us back in the days for the make or buy assessment and co-manufacturing setup of the plant-based drinks, where speed, availability, and expertise was relevant at that time. Um, so yeah, that's basically what we can do for corporate companies. We have done that for Cargill, for Danone, and Friesland Campina, doing a project for Dr. Utker right now. So quite a proud of those names also
Yeah.
in our portfolio. Yeah.
Yeah, substantial clients. So,
Yeah.
um, so just as a last question, Arjen, over the next 5 years, I mean, what advice would you give to startups and founders to prepare for the next 5 years in this space?
The next 5 years, well, that's quite a long run. I would like to take it a little bit shorter. When it comes to having ideas right now, it's more we advise to look at the end. So where does your innovation end up? Where does your concept end up? Is it a product for the consumer? Is it a B2B ingredient? Is it a process improvement technology which you can sell to corporate groups? That's a time span of a couple of years, maybe. So knowing ultimately where you want to sell your solution. As an example, we are doing some projects where we found together with the client, it might make sense to not just stick to a co-manufacturing model, but maybe also to a licensed manufacturing model, where a client perhaps can produce with this technology in their own house, right, in their own factories and sell the ingredients. And those are the ideas to think ahead. We would like to every project that we start at the end. What is your client? Where is it located? What is the type of product? And how does the supply chain look, calculating back towards the innovation that we have right now? And then we're building this roadmap on a project basis. But in general, it would be that when it comes to your concept and the innovation, it makes total sense, also related to funding, to not underestimate the pitfalls and opportunities in industrial upscale. And that's really, that's what we have experienced, of course, in the projects here we have done so far. But that's really an important one to keep in mind. And as a separate thing, the production landscape in Europe is quite fragmented. And I think it makes total sense that these medium-sized manufacturers are more collaborating with each other. To align and to make it much more interesting and feasible for also lower volumes and startup initiatives to get it really off the ground, to make sure that's giving some more opportunity to grow. One aspect there also might be pilot facilities, and there is also a challenging thing there, or shared facilities, right? In some countries, the government or companies are considering to set up shared facilities. And in most cases, those are meant for innovators and startups which don't have the machines themselves, or they want to rent something. But in order to be such a shared facility to be economically viable and make some return, ultimately, it should not contain too many specific types of equipment, because they will not be used on a frequent basis. So you have, let's say, more middle of the road equipment in there, but then you're missing the very specific innovations, the very specific technology which some companies are innovating. And they need sometimes those really sophisticated types of equipment. And then a shared facility doesn't answer that question. It's more like a middle of a road solution. Okay, yeah, you can use my kitchen, you can use my homogenizer, you can use my mixing tank. But in a lot of cases, that's not the problem. So there are quite some challenges in the manufacturing landscape, I would say.
Yeah. Now, clearly, yes, you offer the services as a consultant to help people with their kind of product development and their kind of their manufacturing sort of setup. But
Yeah.
it sounds like you can also link together startups with major kind of corporates and
Correct.
help those people find each
Yes.
other.
Yeah. That's also something that we started doing last year, where more and more manufacturers that we found for projects of clients, manufacturers discover that we have the network on the other hand as well, on clients like the corporates I mentioned, but also these scale-ups. So I think we are doing 3 of those business development projects right now for manufacturers. And we're also assisting 2 of our startup clients, helping them with the business development. So not just finding co-mans and ramp up the production and industrialize, but also support them with identifying clients with thinking about licensed manufacturing models. For our job, we are visiting these exhibitions, these trade shows, and as an extension, we can easily also use that exercise for these startups to engage and for us to scout anonymously, introduce them to other parties. So, yeah, and there are quite some events that we are joining, like the Future of Protein Production, for instance, where we have met. But also the trade shows like Girl Food last week, the Food Ingredients Europe, Frankfurt again this year, CL Anuga, PLMA, those things. The FNA Next conference, the Bridge to Food, well, Plant Forward. Those are the things that also helps our startup and scale up clients expanding their network. Yeah, you got that right. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Before I let you go, I just wanted to find out, what you enjoy about this work, particularly. Why, what excites you about what you do?
Yeah, it's nice because back in 2010, I started as a self-employed professional in procurement and supply chain in the food industry, doing all kinds of different interim projects for one company at a time. Love to do that, but I always had this idea about that was the first step to a real company, right? A sort of real company. Well, I can say we have a real company now, and it's exciting to do. I'm the same thing that we advise our startups. We are startup as well, so we also understand this dynamic, right? And it's a nice journey. It's amazing. It's sometimes really challenging. It goes with ups and downs. We have built a model which is quite flexible in itself. If a client calls today and he gives a go on the quote tomorrow, we can have a kickoff on Monday. We are so flexible to start immediately, but it has a downside as well. When there's a project on hold today, I might be having less work next week, right? So that's a challenge, of course, of balancing the capacity and the resources in there. But no, I enjoy building a company like this, especially with something that is, well, quite unique in the market and which is not um, out there already with the way we do that. So yeah, feeling proud in the same time. Yeah.
Okay. And which company are you most excited about at the moment? Which of your startups that you're helping?
Yeah, that's nice because some of them are pending projects, and I don't reveal names of pending clients until the project is being finalized, and that has to do with the process of anonymous engagement we do with manufacturers, not revealing the source and the client and the concept. There are, however, a few very nice examples. For instance, the Formo project in Berlin. That was actually one of the first scale-up journeys that we joined. And that's where, let's say, the spark ignited in this type of business to focus on. That was really nice.
Formo is also one of Agronomics's portfolio companies.
Yes, together with those vegan cowboys, indeed. And well, I like it. And unfortunately, they decided last year to stop with the consumer product they have developed. But the journey coming to that previously was, well, amazing to do, and I still am grateful for joining that journey, jumping on a riding train. Yeah, let's say improving the train while riding, building the company along the way. It's amazing. Another nice example was the Good Good peanut butter project, where it's a CPG, like consumer product, where we have supported the client from just a simple idea until first shipped container, recipe development, co-manufacturing, scouting, project management, trials, negotiations, contracting, everything in there. So those are two nice examples of two comprehensive projects. Make us proud. Yeah, and the portfolio of clients in general, like the names I mentioned on the corporate, but also startups and scale-ups from the US, from Israel, from Asia.
Yeah, that sounds very exciting, and I look forward to kind of following your journey. Thank you for
Me too.
coming on Future of Foods interviews, Arjen.
Thank you so much, Alex. It was really a pleasure to join us. I hope this was a memorable conversation. For me, it was actually. And well, thank you for hosting this, and looking forward to stay in touch, Alex. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.